Hi, good morning, everyone. Um, Today, I will talk to you about this topic, that is, what are humans made up of, and are we made of stardust? I am Dr. Farhana Haque. I'm a lecturer in molecular medicine in the Lincoln Medical School. So, uh, to begin with, what are humans made up of, and are we made of stardust? At first, we will talk about elements and stardust, and then I will talk a little bit about human body and its functional units. And in the end, I will end it with looking into human body and the macromolecules. In the elements and stardust, I will look into the composition of human body. Then we will see a life cycle of a star. Then we will look into supernova as nuclear reactor. And in terms of human body, we will look into the functional unit, that is the cells, DNA structure, and what does DNA codes for. And we will end at looking at all the macromolecules that makes the human body, their composition, and how it is all related. So, very famously, Carl Sagan, who is a very famous astrophysicist and also a presenter who made the science very approachable to us normal human, and who said that cosmos, very famously said that the cosmos is within us and we are made of star stuff. Now, if you think, look back 3.8 billion years ago, the universe has begun, and it began with a big bang. And all the atoms it has created so far has found their way into everything from the celestial stars ultimately to human body. And it is totally 100% true. Nearly all the elements of human body were made in a star at one time. And many of them has come through several supernova stars. So from the nitrogen in our DNA to calcium in our teeth, iron in our blood, we were all once made in stars. So if you look into the composition of our body, 90% of your body mass in fact is stardust, and majority of the element in your body were once created in the star. So in our body we have oxygen, we have carbon, we have hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium. All of these elements were made inside a star, and the more and complicated, heavier elements were created from the supernova stars. And these are the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, that make up our DNA. Now, if you look into the supernova, if you don't know about it, so there is a life cycle for all the stars. So supernova is a life cycle end for a massive star. Here you can see a nebula. Inside this nebula, the stars are produced. Then the stars goes through their life cycle. They're in main sequence. Then they become, when they are dying, they will become red supergiant. Then they will become supernova and explode. In the main sequence, what happens is that they fuse the hydrogen that is they are made up of. So the Big Bang, after the Big Bang, is most of the hydrogens and heliums were created. And in the star, these hydrogen molecule fuse to form helium. And that is the stage that most of the stars stay. And then when all the hydrogen has become helium, the stars starts have finished all its fuel. So what they do, they start to fuse the helium molecules and then fuse them into either carbon, iron, or other heavier element. And here you can see the red supergiant where these are the reactions that is happening. And after this phase, when all the iron has been made, the core of the supergiant collapses and it explodes in supernova. And when this explosion happens, all the heavier elements are produced. The energy from the explosion that makes all the other heavier elements that we have in our body. And then these are, as stardust, are expelled into the space. So without this supernova explosion, there will be no heavy elements in the interstellar gas. In particular, there will be no silicon to form the rocky planets, there will be no oxygen to form the water, and none of the elements that we depend on here on Earth, which we are made of, will be produced. So as I just mentioned, stars are like nuclear reactors. So nuclear reactors where all you will fuse two nuclei to make a different thing. So stars are like nuclear reactors. They take the fuel, in this case, in the beginning is hydrogen, and then convert it to something else. So hydrogen can be formed into helium, helium builds into carbon, and then nitrogen and oxygen, iron, sulfur, and all the heavier elements. And most of the material that we are made up of are made in the dying star that died in explosion. That is the supernova. And this is a red giant picture, a picture of a red giant star. And during their, when they are approaching their death, these are the elements in different cores are made. So it's like an onion shaped structure. At the core, you will find the irons are making of iron, then making of silicon, oxygen, carbon, and these are all fusing to a different element at this core. And and these are the time period that it takes for it to be formed. So it takes a lot. So star stays in that duration, millions of years, forming from hydrogen to helium, then another million years from hydrogen to carbon. Then when it's starting to die, and then within only hundreds of years and months and then, and ultimately when it collapses within seconds, all the heavier elements are made. So far we have seen more uh, diagrammatic pictures, and now if you see more real picture, so this is a crab nebula, and it is actually a remnant of supernova. And this picture was taken by Hubble telescope, and where what they have done a spectral observation of the chemicals that make up this crab nebula. So when they did the spectral observation, they see that in green, you can see that is the more signature in here for oxygen. And when the yellow light that is emitted, that shows hydrogen, the amber light that is emitted from the crab nebula, that shows nitrogen, and the red light that is emitted from the crab nebula, that is more the signature emission, and that is sulfur. So you can see that from telescope observation, we can now see the chemical composition of these nebulae, and we can see what they are made up of. Now, if you look into all the elements of human body, there are mostly there is oxygen, then carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, sulfur. So all these elements that make up human. And if you look into their origin, so most of them, that around 73% has been formed during explosion of massive stars, and a little bit around 16% from dying of low mass stars, and only around 10% has been formed during Big Bang fusion, that is mostly comprised of hydrogen, and a few only a few amount is made in other type of reactions. So you have now seen that the relation of all the elements and stardust to human body. And now let's look into the human body and its functional units, what we are made up of actually. So we have cells, we have DNA. We'll look into a little bit into DNA structure and a little bit into what DNA codes for. So as I just mentioned to you, that most of our body is oxygen. And then around 18% is carbon, around 10% is hydrogen, little bit nitrogen, and other trace elements. And if you look into the composition mass-wise in a different type, in tissue-wise, you will see most of our body is comprised of muscle cells, and we have fat cells, around 20%. We also have other cells like brain, kidney, lungs, skin, and a lot of the composition is also extracellular mass. And we have around 5% is with blood. Now, if you look into our body, so that is us, and our body is made up of trillions of cells. And each of these cells, most of these cells have a cell nucleus, and within the cell nucleus there is chromosomes. So this is a chromosome, and these chromosomes are made up of strands of DNA, which is very, very long. It can actually travel, if you make it into a thread, you can travel to sun. And so a section of this DNA is actually gene. You might have heard of genes, and this is the gene that carry the inherited instruction that makes you you. So if you look into the DNA structure, I just showed you that from chromosome, this DNA thread, and this is the DNA. So DNA is a double helical structure. And this thread is made up of sugar and phosphate. So sugar and phosphate makes this backbone. And there is also base pairs. So these base pairs are adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. The abbreviation are A, T, G, C. So these are the basic structure and pattern of a DNA. Now, if you look more closely, you will see that A always binds with T, G always binds with C. And this is the pattern you will see throughout the DNA. And ultimately, these patterns will make the genetic code and the instruction that makes you you. So if we look up closer, DNA is made up of molecules called nucleotide. And if you look at the nucleotide, you will see there is sugar group, there is phosphate group, and there is nitrogenous group. And here, if you see it at the molecule, you can again see the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphate, nitrogen. So that's the basic things that is the making the DNA. And so the bases, as I just mentioned, are adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, A, T, G, C. This is the order of these bases will determine the DNA instruction that you have and the genetic code that you have. So what is genetic code? And what does the DNA code for? And what does it do? So in the nucleus, there is DNA. It is then transcribed to RNA. And RNA is a single helix, not a double helical structure, which carries the message from the DNA. This then goes to the cytoplasm where it makes the protein. And protein is the structural unit that carries out all the other functions of your body. So DNA has the plan for building all the proteins. And 3 DNA bases, the bases that we talked about, will code for 1 amino acid. That is what is known as codon. So here you can see a DNA molecule, gene 1, gene 2, gene 3. And here is the DNA strand, the ATGC, in a fashion that is in a pattern. And it is then transcribed into RNA. And this ATGC, this 3-letter stuff, that is the codon. So that codes for only 1 amino acid. And in this case, you can see this codon has code for this amino acid, this codon has code for this amino acid, and so forth. And all these amino acids joined together makes a protein. There are around 25,000 genes in our body and cells that make and operate a human and all of its protein. And this these 25,000 gene ultimately makes hundreds and thousands of protein that makes us and function, that makes us as human and also operate all of our function. So now we have looked into the human body and its functional unit. Let's look at the human body and its macromolecules and the stuffs that are it's made up of. We'll look into the major type of macromolecules, their composition, and we will end with how it's all related. So we have looked into different composition of human body. In another type of composition, you would see in a healthy adult by its weight, most of our body contains water. So around 61% is water, 17% is protein. These are the macromolecules. Around 13% is fat, and very few percent is carbohydrate. And there is also other minerals as well. And water, as you know, H2O. So it has 2 hydrogen and 1 carbon, 1 oxygen. Now, if we look into the macromolecules, so one of the macromolecule is amino acids, which makes the protein. So here you can see an amino acid in this case, and alanine is an amino acid. And these amino acids joins together to make a protein. And this ultimately, in this example, this is a protein that is an intermediate filament that is found inside the cell and gives the cell a tensile strength. And so to the core of all of it is the amino acid that is the basic building block for this protein. And if you see, most of these macromolecules are made up of these big 4 elements, that is carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. We just looked into the DNA and its structure, and there also you have seen how the sugar, phosphate, and base has made the nucleotide, which makes ultimately the DNA and the chromosome, and that is the inherited base of genes, and that is what we inherit from our parents. And this, the building block of it is the nucleotide. Here again, you can see it's made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen. Another macromolecule that we have in our body are carbohydrate. Here is a sugar moiety. When they all joins up, they makes polysaccharide, and you will find them having valuable function in the cell membrane. Here you can see a sugar chain of glycoprotein, which carries a lot of information from outside of the cells to inside of the cells. Lastly, there is fatty acid. Fatty acid here, again, you can see carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, a long chain of hydrocarbon, which makes the fat molecules, and that comprised in all of the fats of our cells and in the fat droplets. So you can see now that most of our macromolecules are comprised of the big 4, the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. So all of these atoms that we are made up of was once made somewhere in the stars at an atomic level. And then they have joined to make some molecules, macromolecules like DNA, protein, carbohydrate. At some point, something got triggered. So when the assembled of all of these molecules into some structure, something was triggered and they have made into a cell. They have made into a single cell. And when the cells, multiple cells have started to communicate with each other, they have ultimately made this multicellular organism that is us. So in us, we have tissues, which is comprised of multiples of cells and which comprise different tissue type, from muscles to skin and other organs. And they make different organs. They can make a stomach, they can make kidney and other organs that have functional unit in us. And here you can see we also have different systems, starting from nervous system, digestive system, lung system. So in the heart of all of these, there are these atoms which has together made these macromolecules, which together has worked together to make cells and then the cells work together to make tissues, and then organ, and ultimately that has made us. So to end and finish it all up is that if you look into our body, we are made up of around 7 to 10 to the power 27 atoms. So there are about this many amounts of atoms in your body. And all of these atoms are billions of years of old. So around 13.8 billion years ago, the universe began with the Big Bang, and the atoms that it has created has found their way into everything. It went to the stars, and then it has fused to made more heavier element. It has exploded to supernova, which has dispersed through interstellar gases, and ultimately it has found its way into human body. So at the deepest level, you are the universe in human form. So just to end with some famous quotes is that the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, and the carbon all were made in the interiors of a collapsing star, and we are made of star stuff. And if you look into every atom in your body, that came from once a star that was exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. Thank you for listening, and I am open for questions.